It was a bitterly cold October night in 2009, the kind that settled over the rural Wyoming plains like a blanket of dread. Sheriff Tom Braddock, a seasoned lawman with 23 years of service, and his young deputy, Eli Mercer, just 8 months into the job, were scheduled for a routine night shift. Nothing unusual was expected. Crime was low in the area, and their most common calls were usually about loose livestock or drunk drivers. The last thing anyone imagined was that this would be the last time either of them was seen alive. At 9:17 p.m., their patrol car was seen passing through the Southern Ridge checkpoint. At 10:03 p.m., they radioed in to report that they were heading toward the abandoned Miller farm, a place notorious for decades of local myths and whispered stories. They said they'd noticed lights flickering near the tree line, possibly teenagers trespassing or squatters lighting a fire. Their dispatcher, Judy Clemens, made a note of it but didn't think much of the call. It seemed routine, until the radio went silent. By midnight, when the sheriff and deputy still hadn't checked back in, Judy began to worry. She tried calling their radios, no answer. Cell phones, no signal. By 1:30 a.m., a second unit was dispatched to their last known location. That's when they found the patrol car strangely parked sideways across the dirt road, headlights on, engines still running. Both doors were open, and their firearms were still holstered inside the car. The spotlight was pointed toward the edge of the woods, as if they had been watching something. There were no signs of a struggle. No blood, no footprints, no tire tracks besides their own. The only thing investigators noted was a strange pattern of disturbed soil just beside the patrol car, like something had been dragged or crawled across the gravel. Dogs brought in for tracking refused to go near the forest's edge. They whimpered and pulled back, refusing to follow commands. One even ran off entirely and wasn't seen again for 2 days. News spread quickly. Residents gathered at the site the next morning, whispering nervously. Some swore they'd heard something that night, low vibrations, like a distant hum, or a whimpering echo that didn't sound quite human. Others said this wasn't the first time people had disappeared near that property. But for Sheriff Braddock and Deputy Mercer, there were no signs of life. No remains. No evidence. It was as if the night had simply swallowed them whole. As days turned into weeks and the case remained frozen in silence, a different kind of noise began to rise. The whispers. Locals, once cautious but composed, began recounting strange tales, tied to the very place Sheriff Braddock and Deputy Mercer had vanished. Stories that were once dismissed as small-town folklore started bubbling to the surface again. The Miller farm, abandoned since the 1970s, had always carried a strange weight in conversation. A place children were warned to stay away from, and hunters quietly avoided without explanation. Now, the warnings seemed justified, even prophetic. One elderly man, Clarence Weaver, who'd lived in the area for over 60 years, came forward and said the Miller land was cursed. He claimed that in 1963, a similar disappearance had happened. A local boy had gone missing while hiking near the same property, and only his boot was ever found, buried half a mile underground. Clarence swore he'd heard chanting that night, carried by the wind. When asked why he never reported it, he said, "Would you go to the cops about something you didn't fully understand? Something that might have been watching you?" Teenagers began to report eerie encounters near the tree line, shadowy figures that vanished the moment headlights touched them, strange symbols carved into bark, and flashes of blue light deep in the woods at night. One girl even said she saw a man in a deputy's uniform standing motionless just beyond the field. But when her brother shined a flashlight toward him, the figure simply dissolved into the fog. The stories were wild, conflicting, and impossible to prove. Yet they were all consistent about one thing. Something wasn't right out there, and whatever it was, it had been waiting. Sheriff Braddock's wife Linda added her own chilling piece to the puzzle. She revealed that on the night he disappeared, she received a call from Tom's number. When she answered, there was no voice, only muffled breathing, heavy and uneven, like someone trying to speak but unable to form words. In the background, she claimed to hear faint scraping sounds like metal on stone and what sounded like shoveling. Investigators tried to trace the call, but the signal had bounced from multiple towers, making it impossible to pinpoint. Still, the timestamp matched the exact moment their squad car was found abandoned. More disturbing was what a trucker reported 2 nights later. While passing near the Miller property just after 2 a.m., he claimed his CB radio picked up strange interference, not static, but a distorted, slow voice repeating numbers. And the name Mercer. He didn't think much of it at first, until he learned of the missing deputy the next day. He returned to the same route weeks later, but the signal was gone. Others tried to recreate the scenario. No one ever heard it again. As the months passed, official interest in the disappearance of Sheriff Braddock and Deputy Mercer began to wane. The initial investigation had pulled in state troopers, FBI agents, canine units, and even military-grade surveillance drones, but none of it made a difference. After 6 months with no leads, the search was quietly scaled back. Files were boxed and shelved under open but inactive. In a town like Dry Creek, Wyoming, small, tight-knit, and wary of outsiders, that silence settled like fog over everything. Life went on, but nothing felt normal again. Each new sheriff brought with them a sense of renewal, a promise to reopen the case or get to the bottom of it, but every one of them gave up or left. One was reassigned within 3 months without explanation. Another suffered a breakdown and moved away in the dead of night, leaving behind a house full of locked drawers and burned documents in the fireplace. Residents whispered that the badge brought a curse with it. Anyone who wore it too long felt the weight of whatever had taken Braddock and Mercer. Most sheriffs afterward stayed for a year or less. In the years that followed, strange occurrences didn't stop, they simply became part of the background. Power outages would strike only one side of town, always the side facing the Miller Woods. Livestock would go missing without a trace. Dogs still refused to go near the tree line. Several people reported finding dead birds piled neatly on their porches, all facing the same direction, all staring toward the old road near the outhouse. None of these things were linked publicly to the sheriff's disappearance, but in hushed tones over coffee or at the gas station, everyone knew. One chilling incident occurred in 2015 when a college student named Jamie Lawson, back in town for a documentary project, decided to investigate the old case. She stayed for 3 days, interviewed locals, and even camped near the abandoned Miller property. On the morning of the 4th day, she was found walking barefoot along the highway, muttering numbers in a language no one recognized. Her camera was found 2 miles away, lens shattered, battery missing. When she finally regained her memory, weeks later, she said she remembered a hole with breathing inside it, and then nothing. The town learned to live with the hole, left behind not just the literal absence of Braddock and Mercer, but the psychological gap. It became an unspoken truth among residents: don't ask questions. Don't walk that road. Don't go near the old farm. Outsiders would sometimes come and stir things up: paranormal vloggers, amateur sleuths, even podcasters hoping for a cold case gone hot headline, but they'd always leave disappointed or disturbed, because there was nothing new to find. Nothing anyone could explain. Just a car left running, a trail of unsolved fear, and silence that never stopped humming in the woods. In early spring of 2023, a retired antiques dealer named Harold Finch came into possession of several items from the long-abandoned Miller property. He wasn't a thrill-seeker or a paranormal enthusiast, just an old man with a fondness for forgotten things. He had purchased the contents of the estate through a third-party auction, mostly hoping to find old tools, rustic furniture, or perhaps rare books. But when he began sorting through the dusty crates in his workshop, he uncovered something that would set off a chain reaction of fear throughout Dry Creek all over again: a weathered leather-bound journal half buried beneath rotting newspapers and rusted lanterns. The journal was cracked and brittle, the pages yellowed and water-stained. The first few entries were simple observations about daily patrol life, local complaints, and minor citations, but the handwriting belonged unmistakably to Deputy Eli Mercer. Finch, who had followed the sheriff's disappearance from afar, instantly recognized the name and knew the significance of what he had found. But as he flipped through the later pages, the tone shifted drastically. The entries became shorter, more frantic, and filled with cryptic phrases like "it's in the pipes" and "Tom says we can't tell anyone, not even Judy." Many sentences were cut off mid-thought, followed by scratch marks and what appeared to be drawings of narrow tunnels or holes. One particular entry was dated just 1 day before their disappearance. "Tom saw something behind the outhouse last night, thought it was an animal, but it didn't move like one. No eyes. No sound, just waiting. We heard it breathing. I swear I heard it say my name. He says I'm imagining it, but I know I'm not." The air went cold. I don't know what we opened. Finch turned the journal over to the authorities, but by then, rumors had already begun circulating. Someone leaked a photo of one of the entries online, and speculation exploded from online sleuths to local news outlets. For many in town, the discovery confirmed what they had always suspected. Braddock and Mercer hadn't just gone missing. They had found something, or perhaps disturbed something, that should have been left alone. The diary was quickly sealed and taken into evidence, but not before a few more disturbing entries were transcribed and shared by a curious intern at the sheriff's office, who later quit without explanation. Notably, the journal included a crude map. It was hand-drawn, nearly illegible, but one marking stood out: a small square labeled OH, assumed to mean Outhouse. Underneath it, scrawled hastily in ink that had partially bled through the page, were the words, "We can't go back down there. It's not empty." It never was. Local authorities were reluctant to comment, but after years of silence, something had finally surfaced, not just a clue, but a warning. What lay beneath that outhouse? And why had two trained officers been too terrified to report what they saw? After the discovery of Deputy Mercer's journal and its chilling references to the outhouse, a decision was finally made quietly and without public announcement to investigate the old Miller property once again. A small, specialized team was assembled, consisting of forensic analysts, a geotechnical engineer, and 2 deputies from the sheriff's office. Unlike the initial search, 16 years earlier, this one was laser-focused on a single structure, the decaying wooden outhouse that had long since been swallowed by weeds and half collapsed into itself. Locals had always joked that it smelled like death. No one realized how close they were to the truth. The team arrived at dawn. A fog hung low across the ground, curling around their boots like fingers. The outhouse stood as a withered skeleton, of gray wood and rusted nails, its door barely clinging to the frame. As they began dismantling it, the air seemed to shift, not colder, not warmer, just heavier, as if something unseen was pressing down on them. Beneath the outhouse's rotted floorboards, they discovered what the map had suggested: a circular stone structure sealed by a crude, rust-covered iron lid. It wasn't a septic tank or a well. It was something else entirely, something intentionally built and intentionally hidden. The lid took nearly 4 hours to remove. Beneath it lay a shaft approximately 20 feet deep, its walls made of hand stone, tightly packed and unnaturally smooth. When a light was lowered into the pit, it revealed disturbing details. Deep scratch marks lined the interior, claw-like grooves that spiraled downward in a pattern too deliberate to be natural. There was no ladder, no rope, nothing to suggest how someone would climb in or out. And at the very bottom, partially buried in loose earth, were fragments of something that should never have been there. Cloth fibers that matched the missing sheriff's uniform and what appeared to be human finger bones, worn down to the knuckle. As the crew descended carefully using a collapsible ladder, the scent changed, not rot, not mold, but a sharp metallic temps that clung to the nostrils. At the base, buried in a pocket of soft dirt, was an object no one expected: a rusted, half-melted cassette recorder. Though damaged, it had clearly been protected by the surrounding soil. Forensics would later confirm that it was from the late 2000s, the exact make issued to law enforcement units at that time. But even more disturbing were the small fragments of rope still nailed to the stone wall above, as if someone had once tried to anchor themselves, or prevent something from escaping. That day, the excavation was halted. The site was cordoned off, and the town was told it was for environmental safety concerns. But word had already spread. The workers who had been there, the ones who stood above the shaft, who felt the cold air wafting up through the stones, who claimed they heard something moving in the dirt below, they didn't sleep that night. One of them left town the next morning without picking up his final paycheck. What they'd unearthed wasn't just a structure. It was a secret that had been buried not just in the earth, but in silence, fear, and purpose. The cassette recorder, found at the bottom of the shaft, was encrusted with dirt and rust, its buttons barely intact, its casing warped from years of exposure to damp earth. Investigators weren't hopeful that anything could be recovered from it. Still, it was immediately rushed to the State Forensic Audio Lab in Cheyenne. Specialists carefully disassembled the device, piece by piece, and found the tape inside surprisingly intact, though fragile. It had fused slightly to the spool and emitted a smell like mildew and copper. A specialist described the tape as sickly, as if even the plastic had absorbed something unnatural over time. After several failed attempts, the team managed to transfer the contents to a digital file. What they heard stunned everyone in the room. The recording was just under 2 minutes long, grainy, muffled, distorted by time, but certain moments were terrifyingly clear. First, silence. Then, the unmistakable sound of heavy breathing. Not panicked, not labored. Waiting. a soft shuffling, like boots against stone, followed by a voice whispering something unintelligible, hoarse, afraid. Then, Sheriff Braddock's voice cracked through the static. "It's not a man. It waits until you're alone." After that sentence, the voice began to change. Experts weren't able to explain it, but the pitch deepened rapidly, dipping far below human vocal range, before distorting into a low-frequency rumble that physically unsettled those listening to it. Some described it as a growl. Others said it felt like the sound was crawling under their skin. There were also strange anomalies, bursts of noise that resembled reversed speech. And what one technician insisted sounded like a child crying, faintly in the background. The tape ended abruptly with a loud thud, followed by a dragging sound. Then silence. The most unsettling part wasn't just what was on the recording. It was when forensics compared the audio waveform to other speech samples. The phrase, "It's not a man," was confirmed to match Sheriff Braddock's voice, but the distorted growling that followed, it didn't match Eli Mercer or Braddock or any known voice on file. And yet, a trace frequency in the background seemed to carry over from the whispering voice earlier, meaning it may not have been two voices, but one, transforming mid. Linguistic experts were brought in, but none could decipher the reversed phrases. Except for one partial phrase that, when flipped and slowed, seemed to say, "The Earth remembers." The recording was never released to the public. Officially, it was deemed inconclusive, but those who heard it, the techs, the investigators, the sheriff's department, all reported similar symptoms in the weeks that followed: insomnia, migraines, paranoia, even auditory hallucinations. One tech claimed she kept hearing the phrase "waits until you're alone" whispering from her closet at night. Another had to be hospitalized after a breakdown, repeating the word underneath over and over again. The tape had given answers, but it had also awakened something that no one knew how to contain. Following the analysis of the tape recorder and the increased media pressure, authorities had no choice but to continue excavating the stone shaft beneath the outhouse. Over the course of 5 days, forensic teams carefully dug into the lower layers of packed earth. Bit by bit, the past was unearthed, or at least parts of it. What they found at the bottom confirmed some long-held fears, but only deepened others. 2 partially preserved skeletons were recovered, buried side by side with no coffins, no wrappings, and no attempt to hide them. But the positions were unnatural, almost fetal, one arm twisted skyward, as if reaching. One skeleton was found clutching a rusted sheriff's badge, fused to decayed fabric, unmistakably Tom Braddock's. The other was missing its jaw entirely. The bone smooth as if it had been worn away over time rather than broken. No visible trauma was present. No gunshot wounds, no blade marks, no signs of blunt force injuries. Their weapons were never found. Yet what truly disturbed investigators was that both skeletons appeared to have been buried carefully, placed in symmetrical positions with small stones packed tightly around their torsos, almost like restraints. The burial didn't feel rushed or violent, it felt ritualistic. Forensic testing showed no dirt inside the bones, which indicated the bodies hadn't decomposed naturally underground. They had been exposed for a time before burial. One expert speculated that the conditions resembled those found in cave environments, where the air was cooler and oxygen was limited, but there were no nearby caves. Only that shaft. And the tunnel. Behind the burial site, a narrow crevice led into the wall, barely wide enough for a man to crawl through. It wasn't visible until a lantern was placed at a certain angle, revealing a freshly disturbed patch of soil. When the team widened the opening, they found a tunnel extending at least 60 feet, branching into multiple forks all clawed out by hand. The tunnel was never documented in any town blueprints, mining records, or geological surveys. It wasn't natural, and it wasn't legal. It was made, scraped inch by inch into the earth by something, or someone, with a purpose. Strange residues were found along the tunnel walls, a viscous tar-like substance that defied chemical identification. Samples were sent to multiple labs. One called it an organic compound. Another claimed it wasn't organic at all. But all agreed the material didn't belong in that environment. At the end of the main shaft, just before the passage narrowed into darkness, a small, circular impression was found in the soil, exactly the size of a human face. Despite all this, something still didn't add up, and the town felt it. No personal belongings were recovered. No bones from hands or feet. No trace of Eli Mercer's diary. And most disturbing of all, the tunnel was warm. When a thermal scanner was placed into the crevice, it detected a residual heat signature that should have faded years ago. Something had passed through it recently. Something that generated warmth and movement. That final realization was enough to have the shaft resealed the very next morning. The official report was vague. Human remains recovered. Investigation ongoing. But those who were there that day don't talk about it. Not publicly, not even to each other. Because whatever took Braddock and Mercer hadn't just been hiding, it had been waiting to this day. The Miller property remains sealed off, guarded not by police tape, but by fear. Locals avoid the road without needing reminders. No one speaks of Braddock or Mercer aloud, not out of disrespect, but because the silence somehow feels safer. The town of Dry Creek never truly moved on. It simply learned to live with the question, what really happened that night beneath the old outhouse? Were they victims of something ancient? Or something man-made and hidden for decades? And if the tunnel was still warm when they found it, then where did it lead? And, more importantly, what came out of it? Some say the land swallowed them. Others believe they uncovered something that had always been there, just beneath the surface, waiting for someone foolish enough to knock. But one thing is certain, the night they disappeared was only the beginning. And sometimes, when the wind is just right, and the woods fall silent, you can still hear a voice whispering from beneath the ground. It waits until you're alone.
If you liked this video, don't forget to hit that like button, share it with your friends, and drop your thoughts in the comments below. Most importantly, subscribe and hit the bell icon so the next secret finds you first.